Hi everybody, it's 314 React here, and today we're looking at the new Painkiller game. We're going to be looking at the graphics and especially the machine learning super sampling because it has Intel XeSS Super Resolution 2.0 implemented in it. Now this uses Unreal Engine. I believe it's Unreal Engine 4, but it could be 5. I'm not 100% sure. But I've always wanted to try out Intel XeSS 2, and I'm going to be using it on my RTX 3060 on my laptop because I still haven't got my PC over from the UK. So I just want to see how this would run on sort of older budget hardware. And also what I did was load up DLSS Swapper and use it to update the XeSS versions to the 2.1 versions. The DLL versions are 202 for the XeSS segment, but I think this is actually XeSS 2.1, which enables frame generation on XeSS 2 compatible games and across non-Intel hardware. And it also unlocks Intel XeSS low latency on non-Intel hardware. So I just wanted to see how this ran, how this looks on 4-year-old hardware. Settings are epic, so everything's maxed out, and we're just going to look at how it looks with native TAA, all different quality versions of XeSS, look at a bit of low latency, and then we're going to see what the frame generation does as well, because I'm really curious to see how this frame gen works on non-Intel hardware. It's also worth noting that these two options will appear when you add in the new 2.1 DLLs using DLSS Swapper. However, Intel XeSS frame generation won't appear if you're in full screen. It only appears if you're in borderless or windowed. So I'm set up borderless here, so keep that in mind if you try that yourself. So at the moment we've got Ultra Quality Plus on. Interestingly, this has a lot more settings than NVIDIA's DLSS, even though they have similar names. So you've got Off, which is using TAA, Ultra Performance, Performance, Balanced, Quality, Ultra Quality, and Ultra Quality Plus, and then Native Anti-aliasing, which I believe is no upscaling, just XeSS doing the anti-aliasing. So we're going to put Intel XeSS low latency off for the moment, and then we're going to put it on to off here, and then put Epic's own TAA on here, and then we're going to go through the settings. So let's dive in. Should also be able to see at the top here, we've got Steam's statistics overlay, giving you FPS, CPU usage, GPU usage, and VRAM as well. So let's go to the courtyard here, and you can clearly see the sort of Doom Eternal and Doom 2016, and even a bit of the Dark Ages sort of artistic influence on this, which is fair enough because it does look pretty awesome. But again, we're not really here to look too much at the actual game itself. So this is with Epic's own TAA. So we've got Super Resolution completely off, got Epic's TAA on, which looks fine. There's also options for TAA and FXAA, as well as just completely off. So with it off, yeah, that looks pretty rough. No anti-aliasing. It's running about 86 FPS here. So if we go up to FXAA, smooths it out quite a bit. 85 FPS, not really much of a cost and performance there, but FXAA has its limitations as good as it is. So if we go up to TAA, a little bit cleaner. If we move around, you can see just a little bit of the blur from the TAA. Not too bad though, not as bad as it was 10 years ago. And you probably can't even see it through YouTube's compression. A little bit of the distant details look a little bit blurry. It's not 100%, but the frame rate is pretty much the same. So if we go up to Epic's TAA again, well, I think that means Epic levels of TAA rather than Epic's own TAA. So that's just a higher level of TAA, thinking about it, which has pretty much the same frame rate, maybe taking it down to 84, 85. Looks a little bit cleaner, a little bit less blurry, still pretty good. And again, we're running full settings here, 1080p on a 3060, so that's not bad. 5.5 gigs of VRAM being used there. So now what we're going to do is we're going to switch on Super Resolution. I'm going to put it on Ultra Performance. I just really want to see how that looks and how that runs. You see the VRAM has dropped a couple hundred megabytes, and we're up to 112 FPS, but there's a lot of blur, especially on the grass areas there. Really, really quite blurry, because there's just not enough details from that internal resolution to resolve that cleanly. So you've got all sorts of shimmering and blur in the distance there. But it does increase the frame rate quite considerably. But if we go up to the next level, performance, and that's a little bit cleaner, 106 FPS. So that's still pretty damn good. A lot less blur. That's probably about at the level of quality the TAA was at, maybe a little bit less because you can still see some shimmering there in the distance, but that still gives you a good enough experience and a few extra FPS to play with. So if we head up to the next level, which is balanced, and we are at basically the same frame rate, 106, going between about 104 106 FPS, and that looks a little bit cleaner. And that shimmering has almost disappeared. Now if we go up to the next level, which is quality, Takes us down to 97, 98 FPS. Looks quite a bit sharper, a little bit more detail. The blurriness is gone on the grass pretty much. Let's have a look for some of that shimmering. Pretty much gone. Still tiny bits of shimmering. And then if we go up to ultra quality, again, everything just gets a little bit sharper. The frame rate is just a couple of FPS down from about 97, 98 there to about 94, 95. So that's not too much for cost. And that does look really good. It's pretty much on par with what DLSS can produce. No obvious blurring or anything like that yet, but we'll see when we get into some gameplay if there's any blur on this. Shimmering in the distance. Pretty much gone up here. There's still some light changes here, but I think that's from these light sources here being a bit dynamic. The light itself is shimmering, so the reflections are shimmering. Yeah, that looks really clean and works really nicely. And again, this doesn't require any proprietary hardware. I think it will use Intel's proprietary hardware if you have an Intel GPU, but if you don't, it will just happily use the shader cores that exist on your graphics cards. This will run on AMD and NVIDIA, I believe. And then if we go up to Ultra Quality Plus, a little bit sharper, a little bit extra quality, down to 89 FPS there. About 89, 88 to 90 FPS, really quite sharp. It's probably another 5 FPS shaved off. That looks really good actually. It looks kind of like super sampling, which is exactly what you want. That's kind of the level of quality that DLSS would produce. Even on the quality mode, maybe some of these distant bits not quite so hot. So that is the Ultra Quality Plus mode. We're just moving the mouse around here. I think there's possibly some mouse acceleration or something going on here. I've got 110 FOV and the mouse sensitivity set to something that feels pretty good, but it still feels pretty off. It feels kind of like the aiming did in PUBG, where there's like a little bit of lag. It doesn't feel quite right. I can't quite get the cursor to go exactly where I want it to go. It's not too bad. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to enable XeLL, which is Intel's low latency. You can do that here just by going boom. So again, this is enabled with the new 2.1 version of the DLLs. And yeah, this isn't exactly a scientific verification, but it does feel a little less laggy, a little bit more responsive. We'll probably feel that a bit more in the areas where the frame rate gets hit during combat and stuff like that. But that does feel quite responsive. I'm not quite sure how that works. I'll have to do some research into it. So I've just been looking into a bit of how XeLL works. I haven't quite got the intuition of how it works yet, but it seems like it delays the frames on the CPU side to make sure that it's always got that latest information coming from the game engine. There's also a video here called Intel XeLL Technology Deep Dive that I'm going to put a link in the description, as well as links into the description about the rest of Intel's technology, some of their white papers, and some information about Intel XeSS 3.0, so go and check that out as well. And then I'm going to spend hopefully the next couple of weeks trying to get my head around how XeLL works. That does feel quite nice. And then of course the big thing that we want to look at is the frame generation. So we're about 85, 86 FPS here. Usually when you have DLSS, I think it brings up an extra little bit here on the Steam overlay saying the internal frame rate and the external frame rate. So it will show like 60 FPS and then it will show the frame gen FPS at like 120. I don't believe this is compatible with XeSS, but the main number to be looking at is this. You won't be able to see the internal frame rate that's coming out, the pre-frame gen frame rate, but we will be able to see the overall output frame rate. Now, when you flick XeSS frame generation on, it forces XeSS low latency on, because that is something you need because there is quite a lot of latency added. I think XeSS 3 is adding in MFG, and that'll be compatible across all hardware, so I think this is just single frame generation. So let's flick this on. And you can see there we've gone up from about 80 FPS to about 130 FPS there. And we're running on a 144 Hertz laptop here, so you can really feel that frame rate boost, and it is very, very, very smooth. However, there is quite a bit of input lag. Not too bad, but it feels kind of like you've gone from 80 FPS sort of input response time down to 60 FPS input response time, but the overall frame rate coming out, how it looks, is 130 FPS. So there's a little bit of a weird disconnect there, but boy does it look good, and it is smooth and does not require any proprietary hardware. It'll just run on AMD and NVIDIA GPUs. I think it runs on anything beyond the GTX series, so if you've got an RTX 2060, it should even work on that, I think. But again, I'm on an RTX 3060 laptop version, and it's running on this. And I'd be really interested to see if Intel XeSS 3.0 will enable multi-frame generation on a GPU this old as well. So that's really boosted the frame rate, and you can kind of get used to the input lag. The other thing to note is that I don't have VSync on, so there's a tiny bit of tearing, but it's not that noticeable. I believe due to the way that frame generation works, you can't turn on VSync. At least not with DLSS's version, I don't believe. But let's try and switch that on with FrameGen on. With VSynced, with FrameGen. See if we can see any frame tearing. The frame tearing is pretty difficult to notice in this game. I think because of the reasonably high FPS. Yeah, I think there might actually still be some very minor frame tearing there. So I think that VSync option isn't doing anything. I'm just going to leave that off. That does feel good though. I think that Intel XeLL is really helping with that latency. So this is with the full settings, and we've got really high quality here. Pretty much at the level of Intel's DLSS, maybe not quite as good, but with the ultra quality plus mode, it's pretty much there. You'd have to really pixel peek to really notice any difference, I think. And we're at 5.7 gigabytes of VRAM here. 5.8, still within the 6 gigs of the 3060. If we turn FrameGen off, still pretty much the same. So I think as we've dialed up the XeSS settings to Ultra Quality Plus, it's actually taken up a bit more VRAM that was being used when we were using native, which was at 5.5, but at the lower versions it actually used a little bit less VRAM. So there is a VRAM trade-off to cranking up the XeSS that high, but the trade-off is worth it given the image quality. At least that's as far as I'm seeing. Let's check that again. So we're at 5.8 gigs here. XeSS off, 5.6 gigs. Ultra Performance, 5.4 gigs. Yeah, so you can reduce your VRAM usage by setting XeSS to lower settings, but as soon as you crank it up to the higher settings like quality and ultra quality, you'll start getting more VRAM usage, but with much higher visual fidelity. So on Ultra Performance, we're on 120 FPS here, so let's enable FrameGen with Ultra Performance Super Sampling settings. We're up to 160 there, and that feels really good on the input. Really nice frame rate. That was from 120 FPS to 160. Now frame generation should be doubling your FPS, but that didn't double it, so that means there must be an impact on the raw frame rate because you're having to take away resources that render the game to do the frame gen. So that means your non-frame generated frame rate is going to be lower than it would be if you had frame generation off, I believe, because otherwise you'd be seeing 240 FPS here, right? So I think that's the only caveat with not having proprietary hardware to help you out doing the frame gen. But maybe it's not quite as simple as that. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe it's something to do with frame timings and stuff like that. Final setting I want to check out is native anti-aliasing, which is confusing because you'd think it might be the native anti-aliasing of the game engine, but that's still grayed out. So I think what it is Intel's anti-aliasing being applied without any upscaling. So you're not rendering at a low resolution and using ML to upscale that and then applying anti-aliasing. You're just applying the anti-aliasing. So the GPU here is rendering at 1080 and then it's applying the anti-aliasing using machine learning. That brings us down to 58 FPS out here. So yeah, we've lost a lot of the frame rate, but it does look very good, very sharp, very nice. And there's a little bit of lag there for some reason. Yeah, I don't know what's up with that lag. Oh, I know why. You can see VRAM there because it's rendering at 1080p and then implementing that anti-aliasing. It's not rendering in a low resolution internally anymore, so it's using up a lot more VRAM, and that's why we're getting that lag. But damn, does it look good. That means you have the full pixel count to play with for all of the shaders in the distance and stuff, which means you should have basically no shimmering. So let's turn on frame generation and see how that helps us out here. So we've got 59 FPS there, 56 to 59 FPS. We've gone up to 65. Let's just say 60 FPS. We've got frame gen on here and we're up to 100 FPS. So we've still got that VRAM overcommit, 6 gigs, but we are getting an external frame rate of 120. The internal frame rate is probably around 60, 70, something like that. So maybe a bit higher, maybe a bit lower. So the input lag feels a little bit like 60 FPS or maybe lower, and then you've got the frame gen introducing extra input lag. But that's not bad. That is actually not bad. That is almost actually double. And now if we switch XeSS Super Resolution off, I think we can still put frame gen on. But let's try with it off at first. So we've just got the game engine's TAA here. So no upscaling, no frame gen, just got TAA, 86 FPS. So I wonder if we put on frame gen, will we now get 160 plus FPS? Let's turn frame gen on and see. Oh, it just goes to 120. So that's about 40 frames up. And then if we native anti-aliasing on, frame gen off, So that's the thing with native anti-aliasing. That's XeSS doing the anti-aliasing and the graphics card doing 1080p, 74 FPS. That's about 12 FPS less than just having TAA on with the same resolution being outputted. And I think this looks better. Either way, you're at an advantage just using this over TAA from what I've seen. But if we enable frame gen here, 76 FPS. Okay, yeah, we jump to 110 FPS. So yeah, it's not quite doubling that frame rate. It's still about 40 FPS extra. So yeah, it's never going to quite double your FPS. Now if we put Ultra Quality Plus back on, that VRAM usage goes down, the FPS is pretty much the same, and the visual quality only drops a tiny amount. I think this is actually a really good combination. If you've got a reasonable graphics card, you can play this game at a decent frame rate, and that translates to other titles that are going to be using Unreal Engine 4 and 5 with this technology, and you can have it on fairly decent quality with frame gen or even without frame gen and still have that really good input latency that's also reduced by XeSS is low latency. So that's actually a really good sign, and it's always good to see this sort of non-proprietary tech rather than technology where you have to buy, a certain graphics card to do it. This is really cool, so I'm glad Intel have done this. So now what we've got is Ultra Quality Plus, frame gen on, and everything else epic. And now what we're going to do is dive into an actual raid of this game and see how the frame rate holds up in action, because we've just been in this sort of static area here at the moment. I'm also going to be very interested to see how the VRAM usage goes. I think this is Unreal Engine 4. Just from the general look and feel of it. 150 FPS, feels pretty good. So if you actually were playing online with friends on this, you'd probably want to turn the frame gen off just to make sure you've got decent input latency. But even then, like I said, from what we've seen, you'd still get a good frame rate with decent settings. So we'll see as the chaos increases how the frame rate is impacted here. The bots on this are crazy, just as a little comment on how the AI works. Because obviously I'm playing offline, so these two characters would be played by humans if you're online. But the bots are just really fast. So still 112 FPS, still feels pretty good. Doesn't feel like the non-frame generated frame rate is dipping hard with any significant lag or anything like that. It's quite a lot of screen space and stuff, so there's no RT or anything like that in this. Ooh, look at that. So it would be good to see how the Intel XeSS would help a ray-traced workload. But again, I'm just quite impressed that this runs quite well, epic settings on quite old hardware now, and that XeSS has really good visual fidelity and good performance, and allows that frame gen across non-proprietary hardware. This game is so clearly inspired by Doom, it's great. I am actually quite enjoying it, to be fair, just as a quick note about the actual game itself. I know it's probably a bit annoying for people to hear that they've made Painkiller into this sort of co-op sort of game, but for me, I don't know, it kind of has a cool feel to it. It reminds me of the kind of game I would find randomly on like a demo disc years ago, so it's kind of fun to just play it, even just with the bots. And these weapons are kind of cool as well. And you get upgrades for them and stuff. So now we're really getting into a zone where the frame rate can drop to below 60 without frame gen. And just while I'm knocked out there, we can actually switch off the frame gen and see that. This is with, again, full settings. Oh my god. This is again with full settings and no frame gen with the Ultra Quality Plus XeSS. And we're still getting above 60. Oh boy, that's not good. Oh my god. Oh my god, this game is difficult. Okay, I'm dead. Okay, no I'm not. So yeah, 65 FPS here, 68 FPS. Now what we can do is really max it out and go to native anti-aliasing. Oh, in which case we get down to 50 FPS. So I imagine, well, we can try it, but I imagine with TAA and native resolution, Probably about 50, 60 FPS here. Yeah, down to 47. Oh, look at that. That's really hitting the VRAM there. So if we go to off, make sure TAA is on. About 60 FPS. It's actually quite hard to get this frame rate to dip too much. But yeah, you've definitely got worse visual fidelity. With TAA. Even then it's not too bad. And the performance isn't as good using higher VRAM. So it actually makes a lot of sense to just switch XeSS on, even if it's just using ultra performance or balance or something like that. You're still going to get a good frame rate, I think. And then frame gen just gives you that extra boost on top of that. And the only downside, pretty much, is the input lag. So that's pretty much my quick analysis there of Intel XeSS 2.1. Now, the game, when you download it, has the older DLLs, so you don't see low latency and frame gen if you haven't got an Intel GPU, but if you used DLSS Swapper to swap out to the latest DLLs, then you will see those options appear, because in 2.1 they added in compatibility across GPUs for frame gen and low latency. Just going to play through a bit more of the game here, just to get an idea of the performance, and just because I kind of enjoy playing this game. This stake gun is really quite fun. Well, you can get an upgrade for it where the stakes drill into enemies. And then you can also get like explosive stakes and stakes that produce gravity wells that suck enemies in. Oh man, that's awesome. I imagine the game might get a bit repetitive after a while if you're just having to play raids over and over again to upgrade your weapons and stuff, but I quite like it. Oh man, look at that. Just like Half-Life 2. And again, we're using frame gen here, and I'm kind of getting used to the feeling of the mouse. So the actual gameplay isn't affected too much. The music is just great. Oh boy. Still a damn good frame rate coming out of this. And I think the game looks fairly good as well. Obviously it's not like really amazing looking, but it still looks pretty good. And so the fact that it's running quite smoothly on this older hardware, and with extra options to make it look and run even smoother, that's pretty cool. And I may also pick up Battlefield 6 at some point to see how it runs on this old laptop, and then hopefully in the new year I'll actually get my PC moved over to New Zealand and I'll get a 5090 so I can start making videos on the 5090 again. So keep an eye out for those. But yeah, thanks for watching. I hope that was quite informative, and not exactly the most scientific method of testing, but it just gives a general idea of how well XeSS works on non-proprietary hardware and on budget or older hardware on this game. Do leave a like and leave a comment, let me know what you think. Let me know if you think I should pick up Battlefield 6 and try it on this old laptop and see how well that runs, because I've heard that's quite well optimized. Subscribe and hit the little bell if you're not already subscribed, that really helps the channel. Thanks for watching, hope everyone's staying safe, and I will see you in the next video.